a little delay in that, right? So let's continue, right? So yesterday we discussed about working with, we started discussing about the concept of routing, right? We started about routing. So technically, we discussed what is actually routing. So as I already told you, routing is just a technique used for web applications to make SEO and user friendly URLs. Right? Now, how this routing works, detailedly we will go into that point. Right. So what we are going to see today is how this routing actually works. How this actual concept of routing works. How to deal with them. Right. So technically, to handle routing and to use routing in our application, we need some special libraries and we need some special options to work with, right? So what are the libraries and how do we deal with the libraries? We will see. So in order to work with routing, you need to understand the basic architecture also. I will give you that architecture of routing, how it works for Angular application. Actually, when we are working with Angular application, how this process works. Generally, we have a client. So the client request is processed. So the client or user, right? Client, user. So the client request comes to this browser. Client request comes to the browser. Request will come from the browser to the web server. So that is the HTTP server. So we have a local server running where our application is there, where our application is hosted. So technically, right. Now here in this server, when the request comes in, generally when the request comes in, so it has to serve an application to the client. That means we have an Angular application. So this Angular application comprises of several components. So because it has a index.html page, in that we have a component. That component is delivered as the starting component for the application actually. It is delivered as the starting component for application. Now, so how these components are going to work, how these components are going to deal with that, right? Let's see. So generally, when the request comes, every application Angular actually uses to make a request with the application, we have a routing engine. We usually have a routing engine. So the responsibility of routing engine is to map with the URL the responsibility of routing engine is to map with the URL. Its responsibility is to map with the URL. So it has a lot of work to do. We will see that. Technically, what happens is this routing engine have to use a route table. It has to use a route table. These are all virtual actually. That means you will not physically see them. A route table is defined. So technically, the combination here, how it actually works and defines. So the route table usually comprises of, the path. That means it contains actually the name, and it contains the component to be delivered. That means the path. Usually the name and the path and resources. So we have a resource option also present there. Now what happens is from the client side, a request will come. That means whatever the components are present, there can be several components in our application. Now, important is when request comes from the client, usually when request comes from the client. So client will request something like, suppose, so HTTP colon localhost and 4200, and requesting any specific, like suppose electronics, some component he is requesting. Then usually what happens is when the request comes in, generally when the request comes in, so this request will be first verified. That means it will verify in the route table. So route table will have electronics, suppose footwear, something like this. And it have the path here, the component and the name details, so much will be there. So those details I will explain. That means when user requests this electronics, what to render. So what to render, that information is defined inside this path and resource. So that information is defined in that location. This is all maintained in a route table actually. Now what happens is when clients make a request, so the request will be processed by this routing engine. This routing engine will verify whether that requested path is available or not. It will verify from the route table whether the requested path is available or not. If it is available, then what happens is it will pick up that resource. Suppose this is electronics component. This is a electronics component. It will pick up that resource and it will render that resource to the client. That means that is delivered to the client. If anything is not there, that you requested, then obviously it will send a message. If anything is not there, then it will send 404 saying that not found. That means the routing engine is responsible for, technically the routing engine is responsible for, so managing, it is technically responsible for managing your components. Means it is responsible for verifying what to deliver, how do we deliver, and all this usually, right? So that means this will configure and verify everything. Configure and verify everything. Right. Now, generally, what is the key point is when we are dealing with, so when we are dealing with the Angular application, this route table is loaded. This route table is loaded when the application starts up. So what to be loaded into that route table, we have to configure. That means what are the resources available? What are the resources available? What are the components? So we need to handle that. That means we need to configure what need to be loaded into this route table. We need to configure that. What need to be loaded in the route table, we need to configure it. Technically, we have to do that, right? That is very important to understand how we deal, right? That is important. So for that, we need a library. That means this route table is configured by us. How we configure the route table? So by using a special file. So by using a special file, and that file is, so technically that file is app routing module.ts. That means app, so routing module.ts, app routing module.ts. So this app routing module.ts is present. Actually, it will ask when you create an application, when you generally create an application, usually it will ask you, when you create an application, generally it asks you like, do you want, so it will ask you like, do you want a routing module for your application? So usually in the beginning we have skipped that actually. That means when it asked, do you want a routing module? We said that no, we don't want a routing module. We skipped that. Later, if you want, we can add that routing module. We can add that routing module technically. So now the point is, in this routing module, so we use one important class, that is routes. Routes is a class, and there is routes class is responsible for, technically that routes class is responsible for configuring the routes. Configuring routes. Whatever the routes you configured, those routes are loaded into this route table. And to configure the routes, we need a reference, an object of routes class. That means the routes class object is responsible for configuring the routes for your application. Configuring the routes for application is managed by using this routes class. It is managed by using this routes class. So an object of the route class is responsible for doing that. How it configures the routes and what is the base library. So let's check that. Actually, what is the option for that? Usually, the library required for configuring the route, what the library required for the configuring the route is Angular router library, Angular router library. This Angular router library provides several modules. One is router. It is to configure the routes. After configuring the routes, Loading the routes into route table is managed by using a router module. This router module is responsible for loading the routes into the route table. So you have to import the router module and we have to configure for the root application. For the root application, it has to load all the routes that you have configured. So after that, it has to export that router module. It needs to export that router module. These two are actually defined in this, right? So technically, routing module requires configuration of routes. So what we need to know here is we need to understand about the Angular routing library. We need to understand what is the library required for routing. In the Angular routing library, what is required is we have at the net Angular /router. So is a package that provides the following modules for configuring the routes and exporting the routes for application, configuring and routing them. What are those modules? So two important modules. One is a router module and routes. These two are required to configure. Usually the routes for Angular application are defined in app routing.module.ts. The routing is defined in app routing.module.ts. So we have to configure all the routes for our application inside this router module.ts. Now, what is the purpose of these two? What is difference and what is the purpose of these two actually? So we have router module and routes. Actually, routes, so the instance of routes, that means the routes object is responsible for configuring the routes for your application. It is responsible for configuring routes for your application. And the router module, it imports the routes and exports the routes into a route table. So it will import the routes and export the routes into a route table. Once the routes are available in the route table, now you can start working with the routes. So generally, the routes need to be configured by using routes and it's need to be configured by using router module. I will tell you. Means how the concept works, we will see. Actually, Angular routes are defined in a file. And what is the file? So app routing.module.ts. So this file, it will ask actually when you are creating an application, when we are creating a new Angular application, it prompts you Do you want to create a routing module? Do you want routing for your application? Actually, what we done is we ignored at that time because we thought that we will learn how to add it manually. That we will do. But if you are adding manually the routing, then the route module file should be configured with the routes. How? So we need to first import. So ng module from Angular core library. This is required to register our routes, our modules into the root application. And we have to import. So we have to import. One is routes and another one router module. We have to import routes and router module from Angular router library. We have to import from that. We have to import from Angular router library. Right. I hope I'm audible to everyone and screen, everything is clear. Is it clear? Yes. Fine. Because 1-2 people are asking for that. Screen is not shared, right? Screen is shared now, right? Yes. Fine. Okay. Now here we have to import these modules. After importing the module, what we have to do is, so for our application, we have to configure the routes. I will keep it in a step-by-step manner again now. So we have an Angular application. This Angular application have a startup page, index.html. Now in this we have some components like electronics, like footwear, like fashion. Some components are there. Some components are there. And like some home, some component is there. Home. Yeah. Now what happens is whenever client requests, so localhost and 4200, that is our application. By default, index page will go. Now in this index page, we want by default one component to be delivered first. So for example, a home component will be delivered in the index page. First home component is defined. In the home component, we will keep links like electronics, we say footwear, like fashion. So that means we give a navigation here. So we give a navigation here for electronics, footwear, fashion and all. Now, what happens is when user clicks on electronics, then I need to pick up the electronics component and I need to render in the index page. I need to bring that component and show in the index page. That is what actually the hierarchy, that is what actually the concept. Now what components you are having and what you want to deliver, what components you are having, what you want to deliver to client, this information is maintained in app routing.module.ts. That information is maintained in this file. In this file, we will define a collection of routes collection of routes. Routes are defined by using routes class. So routes is an array. That means we create a collection of routes. It's an array of routes. So here in the routes, we define a path and we define so many other details. We define path and we define so many other details. All the routes are configured here. After configuring the routes, that means usually the path will be like some electronics. So path will be like some footwear. And there will be additional information also about that. That means which component to deliver when they requested that, like that. Now, after configuring the routes, so how routes are configured? By using routes collection. So you need these routes to configure the collection of routes for your application. Okay. These routes need to be exported to the main route application so that our application starts using them. Then what we have to do is we have to use a router module. By using router module, we can export the routes into the route table. What we have to do is through router module, we have to define for route and what to be loaded for the route application, route level application. The routes need to be loaded for route level application. For root, for child, we can use both of them, I will show. So that means for root level application, these routes need to be loaded. Whatever the routes you define, they must be loaded. That means it will import this first. We will import that first. After importing the routes, we have to export that routes, export the router module. That means these routes are now ready. Then where they are already exported actually. These routes are actually exported into a route table, which contains collection of all the routes that you have defined. They are present inside this route table. Now, when client makes a request, actually that request will first, that means you clicked on electronics. Then this request will come to the route table. Route table will verify, is there any route defined by that name? Here, it is any route defined by that name. It will verify. In the routes collection, it will verify. The routes are exported here, right into the route table. It will verify. If it is there, then what it will do is, now it will go to that particular component. It will go to that particular component. And renders this component to the client. It will go to the component and it will render that component to the index page. It can load into the existing location and it renders that to the index page. So this is how actually the flow works. That means you made a request. First, it will be verified from the routing table. If it is there in the routing table, then it will deliver you. If not there, then it will show obviously status codes like not found, not authorized, something, any issue is there. But from where the route table gets information from a routes collection. And who loads that routes into the route table? Router module. Router module is going to do that. That means routes is nothing but, you can say that it is a collection. It is a collection of routes for your application. for your application. What router module will do? So router module is nothing but, so it imports and exports the routes into route table. So whatever the client requests, it is verified from the route table and delivered to the client. So whenever the client request comes, whenever the client request comes, it verifies from route table. Whenever the client request comes, it verifies from route table and renders. That is how actually the process works internally. So for this, we need two important modules. One is the router module, another one is the routes module, right? And how to configure the route? How do we define the route? We will see. That means in this, what we have to do now, we have to create a constant. We have to configure a constant of routes. And it is of type routes. It is a collection of routes. You have to define the routes collection here. Now, what is the meaning of constant? Why the routes are defined as constants? Some people immediately ask the question without thinking what they have learned actually, right? But if you think what you have learned about constant, then you can imagine its purpose actually. What does the const means? What does the const means? Tell me. What does the const means? Const means a constant needs an initialization, mandatory to initialize. Am I right? Right. That means the main purpose is it's mandatory to initialize. That means routes are mandatory to initialize. You cannot declare and assign routes. Yes, you cannot redefine the routes. Routes once configured, they cannot be redefined. Understood? That means in general interviews also they ask why the routes collection is a constant, because routes once initialized cannot be changed and routes must be initialized. So it must be initialized, right? Routes needs an initialization. So it is mandatory that routes need to be initialized. That's the reason it is constant. It is constant. Now we will define the routes. How to write the routes, I will tell you. After that, we are importing ng module. Ng module is a marker which is used for modules. Modules are marked by using ng module. And what is the class name? So export class. So export class, and the class name is app routing module dot module. That is the class. App routing module is the class. Technically, app routing module is the class, right? So here the key point is, so when you are, the marker, this is the marker which marks that it is a module. Routes are defined in a module. So component have a component marker, service, pipes, they have their own markers. Service has an input markers, right? Providers, the options defined for them. Pipes have pipe markers, component have component markers. Modules are marked by using ng module. In the ng module, you have to tell what to import and what to export. The module needs import. It has to import. So what to import? From router module, for the root application. So for root application, it has to import the routes. It has to import the routes, and it should export. Export that router module so that it is loaded into route table. Routes are imported from the routes collection for the root application, and it is exported. Once you define export, it is accessible globally. That means you can access. You can import for root or for child. That child also next level we will see. That means whatever the routes are configured, those routes are loaded into the route table now. All the routes are in route table. Now what you have to learn extra is how to configure the routes. How do we define the routes? How do we access and use the routes? What are the properties for the routes? We will see that, how we can manage, what are the options, we will see. First, one simple basic approach we will see now. A simple basic approach. What I am doing is, up to this part we will implement actually. I will take a new, I will take you the project workspace. Okay. Here already, so we have an application. You see, this is a workspace. In this workspace, currently we are working with, in the workspace, so we are working with the Amazon application. You can see in the projects, we have Amazon. That is the application. So now we will create one new application. All these days we were working with this application. In this workspace, we will create one more application. So open the terminal. How to create a new Angular application already we know. We will just use ng generate application and application name. Suppose I give the application as some Flipkart, something. I am adding one more application to our workspace. I am generating an application called Flipkart. Okay. When I select this, I am creating a new project now in the workspace. Now in this Flipkart application, first step, you can see it will ask, would you like to add Angular routing to your application? You can see it will ask, would you like to add Angular routing? Earlier we ignored that. Now also we can ignore. So we can ignore and we can add manually. It doesn't matter, right? So I will say yes. Then if I say yes, it will create a module for you and it is ready to use. We will do manually. Then I will say no. So we will add manually and we will see how to add, where to add and all. If I say yes, directly the file is given to you. You have to just customize for your requirements. All the dependencies it will take care actually. So initially I am saying no. Okay. Select a CSS and now I am creating a new application. We are creating a new project. That means in our workspace, already we have a project called Amazon. I am creating another project called Flipkart. And I am not adding the module here. I am not adding any module, means I am not adding any routing module here also. I just taken an empty project. Because already your workspace is configured with Bootstrap, Font Awesome and all, we can pull them from node modules and use. So it is installed successfully, project is ready. This time it is a little bit faster than first creation. Because in the first creation, you might have taken longer time because everything need to be generated for you. Now it is done, project is ready. Now you can see that in the projects, we have two projects now. So the Amazon and Flipkart. That is our previous project. This is the newly created project, Flipkart. Let's open this project. In the project, let's go to the CSS style CSS file. And here, the question is, do I need to install Bootstrap and all again and again? No, not required, because already you have it for workspace. You can use in any project now. Then what you have to do is we have to import. So we have to import // so // then // node modules. So because we have at several levels of directories in the node modules, so we have to use Bootstrap dist css bootstrap .css, right? Now you need one more thing. So import, and so that is // This is from node modules. So we have fonts in that CSS, all .css. Font awesome is also configured here. We are importing those two libraries that are required for our presentation and all. Okay, done. Now for this project, open this project app folder in integrated terminal. So now I am currently in this project. This is the project location. This is Flipkart app. And let's add some components here. So ng generate component. And I am adding the components like home. I'm adding the component like home, about, contact, or some components we can add here. Right. Home, so skip tests. Okay. So the home component is added. Similarly, we will add few more components, skip test spelling. Okay, fine. So we are adding the home component and some other components, ng generate component called electronics. So skip tests. Okay. And another component, 3-4 components we will generate. ng generate component, so footwear. So skip tests. Okay. And ng generate component fashion, skip tests. Okay. So, and one more I will design here, like ng generate component not found, so skip tests. Okay, few components I added here. So few components we designed here. Okay, fine. Now, after configuring these components, now we can design these components. Okay, first design these components. Home, about home, fashion, footwear, electronics, all these components we need to design. So we need to design. So let's design the components with simple content. So I will go to the assets, and in the assets, so I go back to the projects. We have Amazon source assets. I will copy these files. Yeah, I will copy these files. Fine. Okay. And I will keep them in our Flipkart SRC assets. I will keep those files here. Fine. Now let's create a simple design. So how you configure your home component? So just let's go to the home component HTML. I'm just keeping this in a div. Okay. And just keep a heading. So Flipkart home. Okay. And something about this is a basic example. Later we will put other content also. About Flipkart. Okay, something about Flipkart. Okay. That is the home component. Fine. Then I will go to the electronics component, HTML. And in the electronics component HTML, so I will add here a div and a heading, some electronics home, and let's keep some image. Source is from assets, so tv.jpg, some width 100 and height 100, some 100. Okay, and just add one more here, suppose some speaker or mobile.jpg. Fine. So, and you can have some content and all. I will copy the same and I will go to the footwear component. Later we will design interactions. In the footwear component, I added similar. So this is footwear home, and here we will change as some shoe and shoe1.jpg. Fine. So that is footwear and fashion, and the fashion also similar. Just we will change some shirt and some jeans jpg. Okay, so and in the not found html, I will just give a heading, a div and a heading saying that page you requested, so not found, something content we define. So now all the components design is ready. All the components is design is ready. Now, all these days what we have done is to handle navigation. All these days what we done to handle navigation is every time to handle navigation, we were keep changing the bootstrap. That means what component you designed to test that, you are changing that bootstrap. Now in bootstrap, there will be only one component, and that component will be used across all. That component will be used across all. So that means only one component will be there, and from there you can access all others. Okay, so components and everything is ready. Currently our application is starting with, by default Flipkart application is starting with the app module. You know that it is starting with the app module. So in the app module, you can see that the startup is with the app component. Okay, that means it is starting with our app component. And in app component HTML, you have some lot of code already. So we have a lot of code in the app component.html that we will change according to our requirement. We will change that. We will configure that. So currently what we are doing is I will remove this all and I will just keep a div, and I will just put a heading as Flipkart. Okay, just a heading like this. Now when I start this project, so ng serve, so we are starting that project here. So ng serve hyphen project is equal to this time Flipkart, because we have two projects you have to mention. So it is starting with that Flipkart project now. So now the point is, every time only the first component will come. That means which is defined in the bootstrap, that component will come. Because in index page, app component is defined, and that app component HTML will be delivered. App root index page, you can see app root is there. Only app component is defined. It should start with that actually. Now I have to change. I have to configure routing so that user will stay on that home page, index page, and he will get access to everything on that page. So once it is built, So we will see. Let's access this. Okay, it is ready. Then I will open the browser and let's request this. So I'm requesting localhost and it is coming. Now from here, I want to design navigation in such a way that user can access all of them. That means user can access home, electronics, footwear, everything. I want everything. Then I will do one thing here. What we will do is first we need to configure routing for this application. Okay. How do we configure the routing for application? Application don't have any routing currently. You have to add a routing module. So we ignored that when it asked us. No worry. What you can do, we can manually add it. Go to app folder and add a new file, and the file is app routing.module.ts. app routing module.ts. So this is the file. Now we configured app routing module file, and in this, I told you we have to import. We have to import. So from Angular core library, From the Angular core library, so we have to import. What you need to import from Angular core library is, one is ng module. It is for decorating the module, so marking the module. And we have to import two important. One is from Angular router. We need to import, one is router module. We have to import that router module and routes. Router module and routes are required. Okay. Now, how do we configure that? So we have to create a constant called routes, and it is of type routes. And it is a collection of routes. It's a collection of routes. We are configuring routes, which is a collection of routes. So every route is an object. Every route is an object with several details. Initially, I will tell you all the details, what route contains. Initially, first property, route object contains path. Path means how you are expecting request from the client. That means in the URL, what is the request you are expecting? So home, I am expecting this home after 4200/home. Okay. If he requested home, which component you want to deliver? I want to deliver the component called home component that we have to import. Similarly, we need to configure the route. All the properties I will explain. So path, if he requested electronics from the URL, it has to get a component called electronics component. Similarly, if he defined the path as footwear, then component to be delivered is footwear. Footwear component should come. Okay. And another path, if he requested fashion, and the component to be delivered is fashion. Fashion component should come. This is the route. We have a lot of things to discuss here. We are in the beginning level of understanding the route. Okay, routes are configured. Now these routes need to be loaded. So export, so we have export module is a class, export class. So we have to export class. Yeah. App routing module, that is the class. You can give any name. App routing module is the class. And how you will mark it as a module? So by using ng module, we mark it. What are the properties for this? It has to import from router module for root application. For root application, it has to import the routes that you created. And after importing the routes, it have to export the router module. That means it exports that router module. So when it exports the router module, now the routes are ready to use by your application. That means the route table is ready. So the route table is ready. And very important is make sure this router module, app router module is registered in modules. You see all the modules are registered in this imports. Here we have app routing module. We have to import that here. The modules that you created, you have to import them, register them. All the modules are registered in this imports, right? So the browser module and the app routing module are currently here. We have imported that. Now, what is the starting page? Starting page is actually this component. Now you have to design this in such a way that from here they can access everything. Then what we do is I will create a div and a class container fluid. And I will keep a heading. So, and in the heading, I will say some Flipkart shopping, something like this. And we will add some classes here. So text center and text primary. Okay. And we will just keep some span for the font awesome. We will put a class FA and FA shopping cart, something like this. Okay. And after this heading, I will keep a div with a class as row. Okay, so and the row style, I will keep margin top as some 50 pixels from the top. Okay, below that, I will keep a div with the 2 columns. So class as call3 and another div. So with a class as call9. Okay. And in this left column, I want to display a navigation bar. I will use an unordered list with a class as a list unstyled. The no list will be maintained for that list item. And here I want a link for home. Okay. I want another link. So another link for electronics. Okay, I want another link for footwear and a link for fashion. I want these links to be configured there. Okay. And in the right side, this is the location where the result should be rendered. Now, important, this link is not an ordinary link. This link should use a router. It should use a routing. It should navigate to this route path. It should use this path as navigation, not a general href. Then the links that you have defined, generally, what you can do is the links that you have configured. Usually you see the output, it looks like this. So generally it looks like this, home, electronics and all. We want these links to navigate to a routing path. Then we have to configure them as a router link. Router link defines which routing path it has to use. Home is the routing path. You make sure that this route path name and the name for router link you given the same. Okay, after that I will put class as some BTN, means we will give a button appearance, BTN and BTN danger something, and we say BTN block some, and we will give some icon of home like that. Suppose I'm adding here a span and we have a class as FA and FA home. So we defined like this. That is the link. Now this link is no ordinary link. This link is a route link. Now when user clicks the route link, it will call this path and it will pull up that component called home component. Then where to render that component? That component result should be rendered in this column 9. The target where you want to render the component is defined by using router outlet. Router outlet decides where to render your component. There are so many points, so we will wire up with this. So much is there to discuss about route paths and all. We will learn about them. Initially, what is router outlet? Router outlet defines where the result should be rendered. That means when I click on home, where the home component should be rendered, it is rendered in this location. That is router outlet. Same thing I have to follow for others. So then I will copy this. I will copy that. So in the routes, yeah, I will define that router link. So router link, this is for electronics. And we have the class same BTN and BTN danger and BTN block. And we keep a span here, span, and we are configuring the class as FA and FA as some TV. We defined some TV. Okay, so that is the electronics related link. Okay, that is the electronics related link. Now similarly for footwear, we define router link is equal to footwear, and we define the class as BTN and and BTN danger and BTN block. And let's keep here a span. So with the class, so we define a span with the class span. So with the class as FA and FA. So this is related to the footwear. Then shoe prints, we have shoe prints. Okay. And same. The router outlet. So the router outlet decides where to display the target fashion. Class the BTN and BTN primary, BTN danger, and the BTN block. Okay. And here for the fashion, span and the class FA, and here we have FA t-shirt. Okay. And you can see that comes in the output in this way. And wherever the list items are there, we can define some space between those list items. Generally, we can go to the app component CSS, and wherever list items are there, so margin top, I will define as some 20 pixel. So that's fine. That means it will keep all the contents in this way. Now, when I click on this home, electronics, footwear, and fashion, you can see that when we select that home, footwear, fashion, and electronics there, right? Now, when I click on that, then it gets that home. That means some home component and its content is delivered there. So actually, this is maybe bringing from some other location, electronics home, footwear home, fashion home. Actually, this home is coming from some other page, some other website. You can observe that in our routing, when you define the routing module, this component is actually home component only, but unfortunately it is imported from projects Amazon. It is not project Amazon. So we want from the component that is present in our location, that is in our project itself. That means obviously it will be like ./home in that home component. This refers to our component. It refers to our home component. So here we are configuring this. So something about Flipkart will come. Now when I click on electronics, electronics will come, footwear, footwear will come, fashion will come. And observe here, when you are accessing them, you are in only one page. Everything comes here. And page is not reloaded to bring the new details. Page is not refreshing. Everything is working asynchronously. Everything is configured and everything is working asynchronously. So it is accessing asynchronously. That means it is not reloading to bring the new details for us. It is just displaying. It is not defining. This is one important thing you need to know. Here, a lot of navigation, lot of things are there. You see in the URL now. In the URL, if I requested electronics, and it will directly get me that electronics page and show. User can reach to any topic directly just requesting from. Of course, if you request from URL, that means page has to load na. So you cannot say that, sir, when you are requesting from URL, it is refreshing, right? That's like silly thing, because whenever you request from URL, that means you are re-requesting again. That means obviously it will be loading. So after loading, the new details will come without reloading the page. That's what the intention of this routing technique. So here a lot of work is there. I will show you one by one, step by step, to understand all this, right? I will explain this one more time, how to configure, and with a step-by-step note, and we will design more complex things now, so that we can understand all the internal features of how the navigation actually works, and it is dealing the navigation, right? I will explain one more time how this process works, and we will discuss detailedly how to write the routes, what are the route properties and attributes, how do we configure and use them, right? That we will see tomorrow session. Once I finish all that, then I will upload this example. So initially I'm not uploading that example because some more changes we need to do here. Some more options we need to understand here. Tomorrow we will discuss them, and then I will upload this example to you. Okay, right.